5.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Starboard Portal. Our topic today is a race management topic, making the go, no-go decision. I'm Matt Hill, Race Administration Director at U.S. Sailing. We have a distinguished panel with us today who are going to talk about how we make that decision. But before we get started, a couple of quick notes. First of all, a reminder, we hope that you're enjoying this and the other resources that U.S. Sailing has been developing, both online and also on our website. We hope you found them valuable and enjoyable. As you know, U.S. Sailing is a membership organization, and it's your membership contributions that help us produce all of this material. So we hope we will encourage you. I'd like to encourage you, if you're not a member currently, to join U.S. Sailing. If you are a member and if your membership is coming up for renewal anytime soon, please, would encourage you to go ahead and do that sooner rather than later, and also to consider doing a multi-year membership, which does also come with a discount. You can join for 1, 2, or 3 years. And all of that, your support really helps us keep producing quality material and doing the other things that U.S. Sailing does to support our sport in the United States. Secondly, I have a brief program note. This afternoon, our own marketing director, Josh Toso, is guest moderating the live panel interview on Sail 22's Facebook page today at 4 p.m. Eastern. The topic is running a socially distant regatta, and it's based on their recent experience running the Lake Max Vanguard 15 series over the past 3 weekends, where they did a great job running the series following state and CDC guidelines in Indiana, and also making good use of social distancing best practices. Among other things, they used Zoom video technology for the skippers meeting and debriefs, and they used MarkSet bots to help with the race course and the race committee, the shorthanded race committee operations. So if that's a topic you're interested in, head on over to Sail 22's Facebook page at 4 p.m., or you can tune in to the U.S. Sailing Facebook page, where we'll be sharing the live stream as well. All right, so on to our topic. Again, race management, making the go, no-go decision for regattas, which is always one of the more challenging decisions race officials and organizing authorities make. I'd like to introduce our 4 panelists and then turn over the topic to them. We have with us today Taran Teague, who is the chair of the U.S. Sailing Race Management Committee and a race management instructor. She is a national race officer and a regional judge, a FAR 30 sailor, a former board member at U.S. Sailing Hall of Fame, and Camp Seafarer and Seagull in North Carolina. Also with us today is Sue Reilly, who is a regional race officer, a regional judge, and an umpire. So she does all of it. She is a regular competitive racer, as well as the principal race officer for the Helly Hansen NOOD regattas for the last few years. And I've had the pleasure also of working with her on race committees at quite a number of Sail Newport events. Bill Stump is a national race officer and also a race management instructor. He's been the principal race officer at multiple World Championships and Olympic trials. He's past Commodore of California Yacht Club and a past member of the U.S. Sailing Board, and currently a member of the U.S. ODA Board. And we also have with us Randy Draftz, who is chair of the Race Administration Committee at U.S. Sailing. He is also the event director and essentially the organizing authority for Sperry Charleston Race Week, and also for the 2021 Melges 24 Worlds, which are scheduled for Charleston. Is that right, Randy?
Correct.
2021?
Yeah.
Great. Good.
Post-race week.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. So what we're talking about today is how do you make the decision? And we're not talking about thunderstorms so much. We're talking about in this new world that we're operating in, competitive events in the world of COVID-19. What are the considerations and who should be making decisions? How do we make those decisions? And before we go, I just want to remind you that on the U.S. Sailing webpage, on the organizations, resources, and COVID-19 information page, there is a tab that's called U.S. Sailing Resources that has, among other things, the most recent version of our guidance for returning to competition, which covers a lot of the topics that we'll be discussing here today. And we'll come back to that, and I'll remind you about that again, because that's something that people are always looking for. So who would like to start? Who's going to start us off? Taran, is that you?
Okay, I'll step right on in. And thank you, Matt. And also thank U.S. Sailing for hosting the Starboard Portals and really turning on a dime to get these seminars and this information out when the COVID situation came up. And that's really the first step in making the decision. You have to be well educated. So I think U.S. Sailing has provided a lot of leadership with your Sailing Leadership Forum, and everyone, you can go back and click on these. They're housed on the Starboard Portal if you want to go back and check them out and re-listen and see the advice. It started off with a leadership forum with Ann Allen and experts on COVID, on the healthcare side, and we all sat through that. And I think that the reason I'm bringing it up is because that's the first part, the first steps. There are many steps in making the go, no-go decision, but the first one is education. And I think you can learn a lot online from all your buddies, from, as Matt said, watch the Sail 22 on Facebook this afternoon to see what they're doing. Just get as much information as you can. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bill Stump for some comments.
Thanks, Taran. Echoing Matt and Taran, I'd like to thank U.S. Sailing for all they've done to keep us educated and amused during these downtimes. And for those of you watching this, either live or later on, who are not members of U.S. Sailing, I would say try it. You might like it. The investment in membership is not very much. And just like your own sailing organizations, U.S. Sailing is trying very hard. Doesn't do everything perfectly, but we're on the right track, and they certainly need your support. So think about going online, signing up for U.S. Sailing, and you'll be pleasantly surprised, and your contribution will be welcome. Past that, in Southern California, I keep saying, "What's the rush?" Which is a little bit arrogant because we sail year-round here, and we don't have to go very far to do that. So, but in reality, we all want to get our families, friends, children back out sailing, and it's a little bit of a maze there with all the overlapping governmental regulations and advice, if you will. But we're all headed in the same direction. So when we talk about the decision makers a little later, we'll get into that. It varies quite a bit depending on the size of the club. But we all have to get to that point where, as a unified voice as we can, we say, okay, we're ready to go. This regatta is on for next weekend or next month. And that's sort of where we are. We have Wednesday night races preliminarily scheduled to start a month from now and right after the 4th of July. And a weekend random leg race shortly thereafter. So we're going to push ahead with that and hope for the best. But like we heard last week from Matt and Graham, we need to be prepared to run these events and make sure that we've done everything we have to do, which now has got a whole another layer of requirements and things to worry about. But be ready, and we can cancel in the last minute, but you can't ramp them up on the last minute. So with that, Sue, off to you.
Well, I'm in a slightly unique position compared to the other panelists. I mostly do I go to other yacht clubs. I go to other areas. So I work with different states. I work with different clubs. And we do have to keep in mind the CDC and the local state authorities and what their guidelines are. Because what happens in Southern California is a lot different than happens in, say, Annapolis or Newport or Chicago. And they all have different requirements and guidelines. And we kind of have to coordinate with the clubs and the states to see what we can do and what we can't do. So slightly unique position there. Randy, off to you.
I guess, okay. I want to echo Bill's, comments. I think what we're hearing a lot now, are the clubs that are trying to organize their summer events. And as, we all know, 80%, 90% of the work is prior to the regatta. So they're going down the path. It's important to go down the path and get your events organized, even though there might not be the no-go decision isn't made yet. It's a lot of work has to be happening right now, not knowing whether it's going to happen. But if those pieces aren't in place, then you're going to set yourself up for a regatta that might not go so well. Mm-hmm. And my past springs experience is very much. I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't my decision to cancel race week. Believe me, we had a whole board going, well, what are we going to do about race week? Well, you know what? The state's going to tell me what we're going to do with race week. It is the local governing authorities that are going to let us know how to run these races and if you're even capable of hosting them. But I think that, it's important, the larger events, the championships, what I have seen is everybody is pretty much just Control-Alt-Deleted 2020 and is now looking at 2021. And, which seems to make sense. I mean, it's going to be a tricky year in 2021. We don't know where that's going to be. So best thing we can do is focus on what we have now and try to get the sailors out there in the safest fashion that we can. Make sure that our optics are good too as well. I mean, I think that people are watching our regattas. We're going to have a regatta in June here on Charleston Harbor. And just hoping that everybody sees that it goes off really, really well.
Well, I think the go, no-go decision is just a continuous loop. As I mentioned earlier, we've been spending time getting educated. We've been understanding, as Sue said, what's going on with our local authorities and when they'll let us go. We've been consulting our medical advisors, our lawyers, our yacht club staff, our race committee, which I think I heard we're going to get to, and again, competitors and parents, and then it just goes around again. You just have to stay in good communication with those folks because things are going to be changing so fast. And in my opinion, we have to be ready right now, but we don't know what that timeline is going to be. But all that we know is we have to have our sailing instruction modification folks ready to write. We need to have the people who know how to clean the boats and sanitize the boats. They need to have been practiced and just continue to do that and continue to learn. And every day, really, we're going to have to reassess, or every week, reassess where we are in the decision. And if there's anything new that has come out that we need to do, maybe some more techniques or some best practices, whatever it is, it's a continuous process that I believe will be in for the near term. But the most important thing I think about right now is it's pretty cool to get out in the water. I think just to get out in the water, it's just so refreshing, and creativity comes into that because I know we're not going to be able to have 9 people on my signal boat with offside starts and trapezoids in a finished boat. And, we're not going to be able to have that, but we're going to be able to do something. And what that something is for your club, you really need to be creative and figure out how to make that happen. Bill, have you seen some creative things that you might be looking at out at Cal Yacht Club?
Well, let me circle back to your local authorities comment. I would imagine that in your hometown of Annapolis, that the local authorities are much more tuned in to the sport of sailing than in the city of Los Angeles, which is quite large and sprawls quite a ways. So the problem that we have, that we're facing, is nobody's going to ever say, all right, you sailors, time to get going. Nobody's going to say that from an official level. They may say, well, you can open up your club now and you can have, certain dining and bar restrictions in place, but the decision to go sailing and get racing is pretty much going to be on our own. And I keep telling our people, just because the red light is turned off doesn't mean the green light is turned on. So we're going to have to use a great deal of common sense when we make these decisions about when to race and what to race and how to manage the races. So I'll give you a fun example. There's a club down the coast a bit, a small, do-it-yourself dinghy type club that went to the local officials and say, okay, well, we want to start using our hoist so our members can go out sailing, talking nothing about racing. And the local official says, okay, as long as one of your board members is operating the hoist. So now their poor beleaguered board is out there operating the hoist day and night for those people who want to go sailing. So it's the point is that we're going to have to do this on our own, given that it's safe to do so, and not to look to anybody else to give us great guidance. And so Randy.
Yeah. I'm sitting here, somebody had sent an email to me earlier this week about a new phone app that's kind of a registration. It takes a lot of the face-to-face transactions, I guess it is, of race registration and stuff. I haven't had a chance to really take a look at it. I was wondering if anybody had seen it, but it's called the Boat Timer app. Has anybody? Just FYI, just sounded kind of, sort of like a yacht scoring type of program, but it allowed you to kind of sign in without going to a registration table. I was thinking about what they've been doing in Indiana, and trying to be socially separated and everything. That's going to be kind of the key, right, for these first initial, probably this summer, is how do we make everything, the social distancing and insulated as much as possible. But I'll share that app. I haven't played with it either, but that's going to be an important component of our events this summer, I'm sure.
So it sounds like we'll be needing to go more electronic and virtual with our registration.
That's what it's.
Well, I know for the NOOD regattas, we've gone electronic for a number of years now. Our official notice board is online. Registration is online. Up to this year, with everything happening, we did allow paper registration. We had face-to-face final registration before the event and skipper's meeting, but everything really was done online with the registration. The waivers get signed. All the notices are posted online on the official notice board. We can easily contact the sailors through emails and texts if they give us their email address and their cell phone numbers, which we request, and we send out announcements that way. So from that point of view, we're not really doing a whole lot different because we've been doing that for years. Annapolis kind of pushed that years ago with us, and it works like a charm.
That's when our official notice board burned.
Yes. And with Zoom meetings now, I know there's talk of doing protest committees via Zoom. I haven't seen any of them done yet or heard if anyone's done any yet, but I don't see why that wouldn't work.
Well, I did want to mention that there's a task force going on with the judges group. And they're working with Zoom and having the technology to be able to show the picture of the boats, the diagram. That's where the holdup has been. So I know while World Sailing, U.S. sailing judges have given us guidance, and the task force out of Annapolis Yacht Club is looking to have it, their target is June 10th to have something. I'm sure it'll continue to improve, but that's going to be, I think, a critical piece too, to have an electronic capabilities for protests, remote protests.
And kind of the silver lining of all this that we're living through now is we're going to be adopting new practices, and we're never going to go back. I mean, at least for, let's say, online protest filing. We started doing that last year on a couple of events, and it's great. So we're never going to have a table where somebody comes in and stands there and fills out a protest form anymore. Not going to happen. And same for notice boards and everything else we can reimagine. So there is some great changes coming if we can just suffer through it to get there. So.
I agree.
Good.
We're starting to see some fun formats come out. I think we heard last weekend, as this wave of regattas and sailing kind of opens up in the Gulf states and the East Coast. I heard that last weekend, Martine helped to run a race at Augusta Yacht Club, I believe it is, and they were using the Portsmouth yardstick, racing everything from e-scouts to lasers to sunfish and maybe even more. But I thought that was pretty clever, a clever way to get to look at a different type of format, different type of rating to get boats that wouldn't normally race together out on a sailing course.
Yeah,
I would just jump in real quickly and
type courses out there as well, that limit the race committee. We've been doing that recently just to get the race boats out onto the water. And it's quite simple, time on time, real easy to do. I think we're going to, like Bill says, things are going to get easier at the end of the day, we're going to learn and make things a lot easier and maybe even a little bit less expensive to do. I'm looking forward to hosting a international jury on Zoom next spring.
Oh yeah.
And saving thousands.
Yeah, the best way to invite them to your club, right?
Exactly. Put them up at the 4-3-star hotel and
give them a virtual sandwich. All good. One thing that I keep coming back to is, because people are trying different things, is we all had a racing constituency in our areas, whatever it was, whether dinghies or One Design, PHRF, cruising. We have a big cruising racing group, and we can't abandon them just when we start putting things on the water. I mean, let's not forget about those sailors who are our tried and true competitors, and try to make things work for them. Don't set up double-handed races for 40-foot boats. You are asking for trouble. There are people who do that. We have a single-handed sailing society in our marina, but they are practiced at it and proficient, and the boats are set up like that. But don't encourage people to take out a FAR 40 with a family of two. It's not going to end well, I guarantee you.
But there are a lot of sailors that are already starting to do that. I know down in New York, they do double-handed, I think ORC, and they do pursuit starts. There's no race committee, and I think they're up to like 20 or 30 boats every weekend that go out and double hand, and sounds like it's going very well from what I hear. I know the handicapped people have been very good at people who don't have certificates, getting them numbers and putting together what the pursuit start times will be for these races. And from the sounds of it, it sounds extremely successful with no race committee involvement, I hate to say. puts us out of work, but
Yeah, we're fired.
but there's also that old saying, I mean, you put two sailboats in approximately the same area on a piece of water and they're going to race.
Well, they say that double-handed sailing, sailboat racing is the fastest growing category in the US and the world right now.
I'm sure it is. And the single-handed dinghies are probably going to become fast up there too, I'm guessing.
So back to our decision-making process. At our club and at other clubs that I work with occasionally, usually it's the people running the sailing events who are conferring to figure out what to do and how to implement it. And then there's the board of directors of the club, presumably making the final decision. So if your race committee chair and your regatta chairs are getting together and saying, well, we can do this and let's try this, make sure you allow enough time for those ideas to be presented to your board and a firm decision made. You certainly don't want to be overruled at the last minute when the board decides that it's not wise or counter to what the rest of the club is trying to do. And I don't think we're alone. Our club has got a good variety of sailors, powerboaters, paddle tennis players, rowers, and so there's a lot of different constituencies of one club. So it's not just all about getting sailing going again.
So we have a couple of questions. We have a number of questions from the chat. I'll share some of those. Randy, you might want to start with this one. What role do the sponsors and sponsorship play in making these decisions as we go forward? Clearly, that's going to be an important part of the process. And generally, what's your experience with sponsors being able to meet the commitments that they made pre-COVID-19?
Obviously, they play a huge role for at least for race week, and they underwrite more than half of the event. But our sponsors got pretty proactive coming into what we were going to do with race week this year. It was a pretty eye-opening experience. The event's sort of been on cruise control, but when you're starting to promise 1,500 to 2,000 people at the beach parties, and now all of a sudden it's gotten limited to 50. Sperry goes, well, how does this event work, any longer? What's interesting right now, for us anyway, is we're running our impression and our numbers for 2020 and sharing with our existing sponsors to say, you know what, even though the event didn't happen, you know what, we spent X amount on marketing, we've got X amount of exposure and X number of impressions for all these sponsors, even though without the event happening. But it's, I've always kind of stood up at our skippers meetings and said, what, make sure you appreciate those sponsors, because your entry fee is going to be about $1,500 a boat without them. So that's what they're doing. And they're going to, we have to, I think on a larger scale, we've got to be susceptible. How are we going to implement the exposure and the impressions for these sponsors in future events? That's going to be my big worry for next year. How do you keep these guys happy? And, hopefully we'll have a vaccine and we'll have those big parties that we have. But if you don't, it's very hard. It was already a hard environment for sponsorship. It's, right now, most of my sponsors are probably just, trying to survive at the moment. They're not really thinking about spending money with race week at the moment, although, Gosling's is hanging in there. We talked to them today. But yeah, to answer your question, I mean, it's going to be a real interesting deal. I mean, they pretty much didn't tell us to pull the plug. I mean, they didn't come out and say that was going, you're going to be irresponsible by hosting this event. But the government did, the government made that happen. The World Championships that I was involved in, is an interesting thing because all of a sudden, our defending world champions were from Italy. So we were looking at hosting a world championship where the past defending world champion couldn't attend, which, begged some interesting questions I tried to get out of, what's fair. We went to World Sailing on that, trying to get some input on that. And then luckily, the international flight ban happens 2 days later and our problem was solved. So everything became sort of a force majeure after that. Hope that answers their question.
Yeah, good. Anybody else want to contribute to that? The role of sponsors? All right.
I think Randy summed it up pretty well. I mean, we want to keep them happy. We want to keep the competitors happy, and the sponsors are in it to get banged for their bucks, pretty much so. And I mean, I think we all understand that completely. I mean, we want to make it good for them.
Right. Right.
Yeah, there certainly has to be an ROI in it for them. That's for sure.
Good. Okay. Another question that came from the chat is, what role are the YRAs or the regional sailing associations playing in providing advice and guidance to organizing authorities and clubs? And I think the answer probably varies with the number of RSAs. We heard from Graham Beal last weekend that the YRA of San Francisco Bay was actually really taking quite a leadership role. Have you guys heard about other YRAs that have really gotten involved in the process?
I know Massachusetts has. MRA up in Marblehead has, definitely. I know we've been, or at least the powers that be at Sailing World have been in contact with them. And at least from our point of view, we rely on them to find out what all the local guidelines and requirements and everything else are.
Okay, so providing background on local information.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And what their fleets want. I mean, the competitors basically are our customers. We got to keep them happy also. So.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
I'll just say the YRAs are a great resource for information. I know there's a lot of communication that we've been seeing from the YRA in discussion. And that's been very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
In Southern California, I think their main role is, well, encouragement and also promotion when we're rescheduling events or trying to get the word out on this thing's actually going to happen. The local one in Santa Monica Bay doesn't really want to be involved in any hard decision making for obvious reasons, because these local sailing organizations don't have any control over what the yacht clubs themselves do. So kind of all reverts back to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're the people on the ground at the location. Yeah. Good. We have another question. Well, there's a couple of questions I guess I would address. I don't remember who asked the question now, but there was a question about templates for notice of race and sailing instructions. And what I'll add is that in our return to competition document, we did make some specific recommendations of language for various things, like the official notice board online and how to manage protest hearings online, that sort of thing. So there's not an entirely new, and I'm not sure anybody could ever tell you any document is bulletproof, but we attempted to address those questions. So we do have standard notice of race and sailing instruction Word templates on the website, but also check the return to competition document for more information about revising those in light of COVID. Anybody else want to jump in on that? Any other comments about documents?
I just wanted to add that the waiver is also online. There are two waivers, competitor regatta waiver and an event type waiver that folks may want to take a look at as well.
Right.
And as we all know, the documents we put out there, the notice of race, sailing instructions, any other conditions are rules. And I just say be careful about writing things into those documents that you cannot or will not enforce.
Exactly.
So, for instance, saying that everybody on the boat has to be a family member residing in the same household. Sounds good on paper. How are you going to enforce that? And it's might be good advice at the time, but don't, be careful about putting yourselves, either race committee or organizing authority, your yacht club, in a position of having unenforceable rules.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So similarly, there have been a number of questions about the waivers. As Taran pointed out, we do have two template waivers. And the reason there are two is, without diving too deep into this, I just want to remind everybody that U.S. Sailing has a prescription, which is Rule 82, that says that organizers are not allowed to ask competitors to indemnify them for damages in a racing situation. So the race document waiver is a release of liability and waiver of liability document without indemnification. The other one, which is for non-competition events, does have an indemnity clause in it. This is one of those things where, we could get deep into this, and we shouldn't, because I'm not an insurance guy. I'm not an attorney. I think our best answer is these are topics that you should review with your insurance provider and also with your organization's attorney if you have questions about it. I think, bottom line, somebody asked the question, well, what about the waivers, and what happens if somebody gets COVID and decides to sue the organizer? And I think the answer is, I don't think anybody knows. This is all new territory. If you went to an event and you got some other disease, you probably people wouldn't try to sue your organization, but who knows, I think really is the question. So definitely check with your insurance provider and with your attorney for information about that. And then I think this is one of those decisions that people have to make using the best information available to them. And it's part of the go, no go decision. There was a question earlier about specific criteria for decision making, and toward the end of this, I'll share the document, provided I can manage sharing my screen in this environment. We'll share that document so people can see. But again, it's in the return to competition document, which is on. If you go to the main page of the U.S. Sailing website, you'll see 4 panels across the top. And the one on the right-hand side is, I think it says organizations COVID or coronavirus information. If you go there and click on the tab that says U.S. Sailing information, you'll find the return to competition document as well as the Word documents, the liability waiver templates. let's see.
And also at the end of that document, which is 17 pages, I think, the appendix B is a pretty useful decision-making tree. So, it is the go, no go, stop, beware kind of thing that you do want to look at, and just make sure that you're considering all those items that are checked off there. Because if you're not, then you're gonna run into trouble down the line.
Good. And I'm advised by Brittany that she's now linked those documents from the US Sailing in the chat. So you'll see them right on the chat box there if you want to go have a look, the waiver documents and the return to competition. And as Bill said, there is at the very bottom of that document, there's a decision-making matrix, right? So it basically says,
Right.
If you can say yes to all of these questions, then you can move on and consider the next set of questions. But if there's any no's in these, then you need to stop until you can answer yes. Another question that came up, and I think this is a good question for the panelists, was about specifically about team racing and match racing, both of which require umpires, the way we currently do it anyway. And one of the considerations, of course, is just like judges at a high level events, umpires typically come from a lot of different places and need to be housed. Any thoughts on umpires and judges coming in from out of town?
Well, it is an issue. Not only, Randy mentioned it's an expense issue and we're looking forward to Zoom or electronic protest hearings, but also it's an issue of, do those judges feel comfortable coming to the venue? Do they feel comfortable flying or driving? Do they feel comfortable staying in a hotel or at member housing? Because we're usually put up with someone. And it's always good to check back with your umpires, your judges, and of course your race committee. Because they're bundled up with a bunch of people on a boat. To all these people, how comfortable are your volunteers that are coming with you to help run the regatta?
Well, and I don't think that you would have a major team race or match race event that requires a full complement of umpires without participation in the event from outside your local area. It just kind of makes sense. So you'd have competitors coming from outside the zone as well. And we talk about having one umpire per boat, which sometimes we do out of necessity when we run short. But it's kind of like with a very reduced race committee. Sounds good on paper, but there is a big safety component there. It's not just the safety of the racers we have to worry about, it's the safety of all our officials. So just be careful about understaffing boats, all I'd say.
And that shorthanded race committee is one of the topics that people always want to talk about, regardless of what the overall topic is. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit. What are you seeing as realistic possibilities for shorthanded race committees? And what would you, as Bill suggested, what would you advise not doing?
Well, I'll jump right in on this one from the race management side. We're already practicing using our electronics and our tools to do race committee, either off the dock, to do a start off the dock, a finish off the dock, using government marks perhaps as the other end of the starting line, of course, using your ollie. There's some ideas on the Appendix U, the 3-minute, essentially the college starting system that may or may not have flags. You can add them maybe down the way, but they're much simpler ways to do it. And actually, Bruce and I are practicing. And it's, if you have an ollie and you don't have to give it a lot of instruction, it's not overly difficult. And if you don't have a lot of boats, and if the boats kind of anticipate that we may not be perfect all the time, on the starting line, on our OCS calls, we'll try to be, of course, but in the next month, there may be some hiccups, but just try some ways just to reduce your staff and get back out there.
I mean, colleges have been doing it for years. I mean, if you go to college events, there's usually 1, 2 people in a boat. You've got 2 marked boats. You've got a race committee boat. They use an ollie box or an iStart now. They use the sound signal start. And I mean, our local Frostbite, we've kind of done it for a while also. I mean, it's not ideal if you have, say, over 30 boats on the line, but anything under that, it's absolutely doable. I wouldn't recommend it for a national or international event, but for local beer can racing, works fine.
And so your entity's known for being very communicative on the radio, at the NOOD regattas. So
Yes.
That's always a big help.
Yes, absolutely. And that is how I was trained to do it. So I just do it kind of naturally. It's just, I mean, even with our championship NOOD event, we're very light-handed race committee wise, and it's more a fun event than it is, although because it is sailboats, it is competitive. But we do everything over the radio. Sound signals start with a whistle and all communication done on the radio. I think we do now have a start finish line flag, but that's about it. And again, it works.
So I suggest to the race committees to really take a look at your equipment. For example, on my iStart, we extended the cord so we could get the horn way up high, so it could be heard further, and it wouldn't be in somebody's exactly in their ear, right when they're trying to assess who is on the course side. But anyway, just take a look at your race committee equipment as well and see if there's some things that you can make clearer with your equipment and easier for the race committee.
Mhm.
Maybe
Yeah,
smaller
we're ready.
marks, etc.
We're ready to run races with 3 people on our 34-foot signal boat, and that's going to work fine. We can just run the iStart the regular starting sequence everybody's used to. But if I fall off the boat, we might be in trouble, or I might be in trouble. So I'll try not to do that.
Yeah, that seems like a good goal, Bill. Yeah. Stay in the boat, please. Wear your life jacket. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, I think it was Bill who said it, was you made a reference to the optics of running events. And maybe we could talk about that a little bit more, because I think it's a consideration that, we need to keep in mind under the circumstances. Somebody want to tackle that one?
Well, no offense to our friends in Missouri, but we don't want to be the Lake of the Ozarks on the evening news. If you saw that event from Memorial Day weekend.
Don't blame me.
And we have our like many other clubs, our juniors are out practicing now. They don't have any school, and it's perfect for them, and they're doing all the right things. But we're just being very cautious about how we go about this. We don't want to be the headline on the evening news. Got enough going on already.
Right.
Sue was going to say that.
Okay. One of the other questions that I'd like to come back to is, inevitably, if we decide to cancel events or to go forward with events, it seems likely that someone's going to disagree with that decision. And, it's part of life that we make decisions that people disagree with and we deal with them. Any thoughts on or advice for clubs, particularly smaller clubs that, may not have been through this process multiple times already, on how to work with their members on this kind of decision making? I'm assuming we don't just say, too bad, that's the decision we made, too bad.
Well, you may have seen that the Club 420s had to cancel their nationals and North Americans and a number of their large races. And of course, it was disappointing for them. But I applaud them, because it sounds like they're really trying to look at where they're running races to have more regional or local events for, say, 20, 25 boats. just try to figure out how they can keep racing for all those folks that sail the Club 420. So I think it was a great pivot, and I look forward to seeing how it works out for them.
I think the J70s have canceled most of their majors. I know the J24s, their North Americans have just been canceled. I know that's been pushed back to 2021. The Olympics, perfect example, being pushed back to 2021. I think optics come into play with this also, on whether you have sponsors who want to be associated with running events right now with everything else that's going on in the world.
So we're both with the Opti class, which I'm working with quite a bit right now, and at our club we kind of have a 2-week curtain on what we're doing. So we have something planned, and we can take it up to 2 weeks to pull the plug and not feel like we're being unusually hard. Because things are changing so fast, we felt 2 weeks was better than a month or longer. But the key to all this is rapid and clear, efficient communications. Got to tell people what you're doing and why. And one of the problems that we've created for ourselves, or has been created for us, is in trying to figure out what's going on with the virus and all the protocols and the phases and whatever else you want to talk about. We've buried ourselves in paperwork. There's way too much to read and to digest. So when we're talking to our sailors about, we decided not to run this race next weekend because, just make it honest and to the point, and don't go into jargon that they're so tired of that they glaze over and they don't get the message.
And I'll just read, Bill Barnett says, to overcome criticism, explain the challenges organizers are facing. Few understand all aspects of organizing a regatta, which I think is true. Sailors don't always know all of the pieces that go into organizing, preparing, getting folks online and in place to do that. So I think being very clear, very transparent, and probably explaining the level or degree of caution that you feel you need to use is probably helpful in that discussion.
And with this panel of race officers, what are our mantras? Well, number one is safety. Number two is fairness. And then we can start going down the list. Mm-hmm. So if we can't satisfy safety and fairness, full stop. We're not going ahead. Right. The competitors, as Matt says, may not see it from that perspective. So we have to make sure that we communicate that clearly.
Right. Remembering, as Jeff Johnson often says when describing who the organizing authority is, it's, who's holding the bag when things go wrong and who has to stand in front of the television cameras and explain what happened. So, yeah, good point.
Plus, with organizing events, you also have to deal with local and state permits and Coast Guard. So if they say no, your organization to be foolish to run it.
Right.
And
I think one point to consider that even if some of our organizations say, you can do it, go, you still your yacht clubs can still, sailing associations, take time to be sure that you've done all these things. You've practiced, you've communicated, you've got all your ducks in a row. You don't have to open immediately just because you got the green light to go. Just take your time and do it right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I don't know whether you want to tackle this question, but this question is, if the panel had to make a go, no go decision today on a one design national championship, what would it be? I don't know whether you have enough information to answer that question at this point.
No, it's easy.
My gut would say no. Yeah. If you can't get people, if it's a national event and people from across the nation can't get there, and I mean, there's some locations that you can't get hotel rooms unless you are, unless you're medical professionals for the most part, or whatever. I don't think that's fair to have a national event that only local people can go to.
Yeah, the Opti class has their national championship, the U.S. Opti class in July. This year is scheduled for Norfolk, Virginia, ODU. And we decided to remove the title national championship from that event.
Mhm.
So they're still going to try to run a regional event, if you will, but you know, not with everything that having a national championship and drawing 200 some odd sailors from around the country would involve. So I'm with Sue. It's right now it's no go until something changes.
Randy, you look like you were going to jump in there. Did you want to add to that?
Well, it's a pretty simple no. I mean, it's again, kind of reiterate what Sue and Bill said. I mean, it just wouldn't be, number two, it wouldn't be a fair event because I think the limitations, nationally that we're dealing with right now. So, it's just really tough. I mean, for this year to really provide a national championship of any level, I think.
Good. I think we've probably answered a lot of the questions. I'm sorry if we've missed any of them. But any wrapping up thoughts as we head out about this challenging decision?
Just quickly, I just wanted to say the virus hasn't changed. We just need to be sure that we are prepared, trained, communicative, done all the things we need to do. Just keep assessing it and keep assessing it. Re-image different kind of events, as Bill just discussed in his example, and let's see if we can get out and do some sailing.
Right.
So a year from now, I will not be saying, wow, we could have, should have started sooner.
Right.
And I do not want to be saying to myself, darn, I wish we hadn't started so soon. So that's kind of my conservative mantra.
Yeah, I'm thinking along the lines that everything is going to be starting like on the grassroots local level and then branching from there. I mean, just the state like Connecticut right now, we're so close to New York and Rhode Island, we have to think about 3 different states. And if you look it up in like the Great Lakes, Detroit also has to worry about Canada. So there's a lot of lines that potentially could be crossed that have to be considered also.
Right. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap up here. Before we go, I want to just remind you that if you're looking for the return to competition documents or the liability waivers, not only are they linked right in the chat on YouTube, but they are on the COVID-19 or the coronavirus information page, which is available through a big tile right on our homepage underneath the U.S. Sailing Resources tab. And rather than risk causing a technological disaster by trying to share that on my screen, I'll let you go to that. But if anybody has a question about it, feel free to shoot me a quick email. You can send it to raceadmin@ussailing.org. That's raceadmin@ussailing.org. And we'll just keep on answering questions and gathering information as we have it. I'd like very much to thank Taran and Sue and Bill and Randy for the time, for all the work that you're doing and the thought that you've put into this. And I want to remind you two things. The Sale 22 Facebook presentation today at 4 p.m. Josh Toso is guest moderating that on running a socially distant regatta. So you'll hear a continuation of some of this conversation. And once again, I just want to encourage you, if you are not a member of U.S. Sailing, please think about joining. As Bill said, relatively inexpensive for, we think, a lot of benefits. And if you are already a member, thank you for being a member. So that's it. I'm going to wrap up today. Thank you all for coming. Panelists and Taran, Sue, Bill, and Randy, thanks very much for your time. And hope we'll see you all out there on the water soon, or as soon as it's safe.
Thanks. Be safe all.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
All right, we